I still remember the click of the doorknob, the way he smiled when he said, "You're not a child anymore." I was 12. He was my stepfather. And that night, he moved into my room. My name is Dorothy Holloway. I'm 83 years old now, a retired librarian from Ohio. But some nights, I'm still that little girl curled under a blanket praying someone would hear me. This is not just my story. It's about my mother. The silence that almost broke us. And the morning we found the strength to say enough. If you've ever felt unheard, this story is for you. Tell me in the comments, when did you realize someone had crossed a line? And if you believe stories like mine deserve to be heard, stick around. You might just find your voice too. The scent of vinegar and winter air still clings to that morning in my memory. The window above the kitchen sink had been left cracked open just enough to let in the Ohio cold, curling around the floral curtains like it belonged there. It was November of 1961, and the frost had arrived early that year, nipping at the corners of the windows and drawing white veins along the glass. That was the day everything changed. I was 10, old enough to understand things weren't right, but not yet old enough to know how wrong they would get. Mama sat at the table, her hands wrapped tightly around a chipped ceramic mug. The tea inside had long gone cold, but she held it like it was still warm, like the warmth might find its way back if she just waited long enough. The kitchen smelled like canned tomato soup and lavender lotion, hers, the kind she dabbed on her wrists after her baths, even when she was too tired to do much else. "You'll meet him tonight," she said, not looking at me. I was perched on the edge of the step stool beside the counter, my knees tucked into my chest. "Who?" Her fingers tapped gently on the mug. "William. He's been good to me." I didn't answer. I was too focused on the way the wall clock ticked louder than usual, how it filled the silence like a stranger no one had invited. Mama reached over and brushed a loose curl behind my ear. "You'll like him. He brought you a book." A book that didn't seem like the kind of gift you brought a child you were about to become stepfather to. It felt rehearsed, like someone had told him what girls my age might like. But I nodded anyway. That night dinner wasn't anything special. No cake, no music, no white dress. Just a casserole she burned a little on the edges, and William sitting at our table like he'd always belonged there. He was a tall man, clean-shaven, but with hands that looked like they hadn't been idle in years. His voice was steady with that deep kind of tone that made you feel like he never needed to raise it. "I've heard you're quite the reader," he said, sliding the book across the table to me. "Nancy Drew, right?" I nodded, fingers hesitating before taking it. It was The Hidden Staircase. I already had it. "Thank you," I said softly, tracing the edges of the cover so I wouldn't have to look up. Later that night, he moved his suitcases into the master bedroom, Mama's room, and left his brown leather shoes by the door. Mama had washed the sheets that morning. I knew because I helped her fold them, even though her breathing came shallow, and she had to sit down after every few steps. She called it a cold. I knew better. My own room was at the end of the hallway, just past the linen closet. It had yellow curtains and a twin bed with a crocheted quilt my grandmother made before she passed. I kept a flashlight under the pillow just in case the power ever went out. I don't know why, but that night I checked to make sure it still worked. As I lay in bed, the house felt different. Not bad yet, but unfamiliar, like it had been rearranged just slightly, so you couldn't quite find your footing in the dark. The floorboards creaked in new places. The pipes groaned in unfamiliar rhythms. And then there were footsteps. Soft ones, not heavy, slow. My door opened just a crack. William stood there in the hallway, light as frame casting a long shadow across the wooden floor. "Good night, Dorothy," he said. I nodded. He stepped inside just enough to be in the room, but not close. "Big day tomorrow. You'll be helping your mama more now." "I know," I whispered. He came a little closer and patted the top of my head. His hand was warm. Too warm. "Big girls don't cry," he said. I wasn't crying. Not then. But when he left, the door didn't close all the way. It stayed half open, letting in a sliver of hallway light that stretched across the room like a crack in a wall that couldn't be sealed. I lay there for a long time, eyes wide open, listening to the ticking of the clock in the hallway, to the hum of the refrigerator, to Mama coughing once-twice behind the closed door down the hall. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't sleep well in my own room. The book William gave me sat unopened on the nightstand. I kept the flashlight on until the batteries dimmed. It started with my dresser. One morning, it was there, the white one with hand-painted knobs Mama let me choose when I turned 8. By evening, it was in the attic, replaced by a darker, heavier one that smelled like shoe polish and cologne. William said it was more appropriate for a growing girl. I didn't remember asking for change. Next went my bookshelf. He said he needed a spot for his papers, his ledgers, his records from back before the war. I watched him move my copy of Anne of Green Gables to a cardboard box, its spine bending like it was ashamed. He didn't ask. He just hummed a low, tuneless song while he worked, like moving my things was no different than rearranging furniture at a yard sale. Outside, snow began to dust the windowsills. It was the kind of snow that made the world feel quiet and far away, the kind that usually meant Mama and I would hang pine cones by the porch and bake cookies that came out too brown at the edges. But that year, there were no garlands, no wreath on the door. The attic stayed closed. I remember passing through the hallway one afternoon and realizing something else was gone. The photo. It was the only picture I had of my father, just him and Mama, standing on the courthouse steps, young and unbothered. She kept it in a gold frame with one cracked corner right above the thermostat. I'd touch it sometimes lightly with the tips of my fingers, like maybe the warmth in the glass would tell me something about him. But now it was gone. When I asked Mama, she just said, "Oh, I must have moved it when I was dusting," and gave me that tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. She didn't even look up from the sink. "Did you move it to your room?" I asked. She shook her head, slow and quiet. "No, honey." Later that week, William started leaving his shaving kit in my bathroom. It sat on the counter like it belonged there, his combs, his razor, his aftershave that smelled like spice, and something sharper I couldn't name. At first, I moved it back into the hallway cabinet. The next morning, it was back sitting even closer to the faucet. I asked Mama again gently, "Why does he keep using my bathroom?" She didn't respond. Just sighed and stirred her tea, letting the spoon clink against the ceramic like it could drown me out. Her eyes looked bruised beneath, like she hadn't slept right in weeks. I stopped asking after that. That night, I took out a little notepad from my school bag. It had a picture of a robin on the front, faded from wear. I hadn't written anything in it before, but now I needed to. I needed a place where my voice didn't feel like a burden. November 28th, 1961. My dresser is gone. My bookshelf, too. Mama's quieter. I think the house is too. I miss how it smelled when she baked. I miss when she used to laugh when I wore her apron. William never laughs. He only smiles like he knows something I don't. I tore out the page, folded it 3 times, and slipped it beneath a loose floorboard near the bedpost. I didn't have a lock, but that felt close enough to safe. The wind howled that evening, rattling the window pane just enough to make me pull the covers tighter. The radiator clicked to life with a low tick-tick-tick, like a heartbeat I didn't trust. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang 7 o'clock. I reached for my flashlight, turned it on, and checked the floorboard. Still there. I turned it off, tucked it back under my pillow, and lay still. That's when I heard it. The hallway floor creaked just once. Then, a sound. A tune. Someone was humming. Not Mama. She never hummed. Not even when she cooked. It wasn't any song I knew. No lullaby she ever sang. It was slow, deliberate. Too slow for comfort. Too strange to feel safe. I held my breath, every muscle tight beneath the quilt. The humming stopped just outside my door. I counted to 12. No knock, No footsteps retreating. Only silence, then the faintest click. The door didn't open. It just eased in a hair more than it had been. In the pale wash of hallway light, I saw William's figure fade backward, like a shadow dissolving into another room. I waited a long time before breathing again. The next morning, he was already at the kitchen table. My notepad was on the counter, open to a fresh page. He looked up when I entered and smiled. "I saw you've taken to writing," he said, lifting his coffee to his lips. "That's good. Helps a person grow up." I said nothing. He didn't mention the folded page, the one under the floorboard. But that smile told me everything I needed to know. I still hear it sometimes. His voice soft and close, like the whisper of wind through a crack in the wall. "You're not a child anymore." It was early December, and the mornings came sharp and gray. The kind of cold that snuck under door frames and made the floor feel like stone. Mama stayed in bed longer these days. She said her chest felt heavy, said her bones remembered the weather. But even when she was up, she moved slow, her hands shaking when she poured tea. I started rereading my old birthday cards. I don't know why. Maybe because the house felt so quiet, I needed to hear voices from a time when things still made sense. One card had a smiling bear on it. Papa had signed that one. I didn't remember his handwriting, just the way he wrote "Love you." Another was from Mama 2 years ago, when she still made confetti from scrap paper and hid notes in my shoes. That year she wrote, "To my sweet girl, don't ever lose your shine." I hadn't seen her shine in weeks. William had started entering my room without knocking. It happened gradually, once to adjust the curtains, another time to check the draft. But each time he stayed a little longer, moved a little slower. His eyes followed my books, my drawings, my hands. And then one morning during breakfast, he said it. "You're filling out?" he remarked casually, not looking up from the buttered toast he was slicing. "That coat won't fit you much longer. You're growing into quite the young lady." I stopped chewing. Mama didn't respond. She was stirring her tea again, the spoon clinking gently as if she'd never heard him. I glanced at her. Her eyes were fixed on the window far away, glazed over. I felt hot in my cheeks, like I'd done something wrong. That night, I tried to shut my door. I didn't lock it. We didn't have locks on the inside, but I pushed the heavy dictionary Mama used to keep recipes under the knob. It wedged the door just enough to slow it down if anyone tried to open it. But William didn't push. He just waited. His knock was barely a sound, 3 soft taps like fingertips brushing wood. "It's just me," he said through the door. I stayed silent. "I was just checking on you." No reply. He left. Or so I thought. Later, the door creaked open on its own. He'd returned while I slept. I don't know how long he stood there, but when I opened my eyes, I saw him silhouetted in the faint orange glow of the hallway lamp. He walked in like it was his own room, smelled like kerosene from the lamp he'd trimmed. His boots thudded once against the wooden floor, then silence. He sat at the edge of the bed like a weight pressing down one side. "You're not a child anymore," he said. Just like that. His hand moved toward my face, slow like a spider crossing a quiet floor. He brushed a strand of hair from my cheek. I flinched. He smiled. "Scared of your old man already?" he teased. I didn't speak, didn't move. He left a few minutes later without another word, the click of his boot heels vanishing into the hall. When I was sure he was gone, I slid out of bed quietly, like I used to do when sneaking cookies from the pantry. But this wasn't mischief. It was instinct. I lifted the floorboard where my journal page still sat. I tore another sheet from the back of my notebook, wrote in the dark, with a pencil I sharpened against the baseboard. December 4th, 1961. Something feels wrong, but I can't tell why. He's everywhere now. Even when I'm alone, I don't feel alone. Mama didn't say anything when he said it at breakfast. I think she doesn't see me anymore. Or maybe she doesn't want to. I folded the page twice and then again. But I didn't put it under the floorboard this time. I slid it into the lining of my winter coat. Sewed a tiny pocket last summer. Mama used to call it my pocket for treasures. I didn't have treasures anymore. That night, I lay still, flashlight off, eyes wide open. The wind outside pressed against the house like a warning. The hallway lamp flickered. A pipe groaned low and long through the walls. Then footsteps, soft ones. I closed my eyes, and I prayed. Not the way they teach you at church. Not with words or psalms. I prayed with silence, with stillness, with every part of me that remembered what safety used to feel like. She was the only one who ever looked at me like I wasn't invisible. Miss Moore didn't speak loudly or wear bright colors like the younger teachers. She wore her hair in a tight bun with wisps escaping by noon, and she always smelled faintly of cinnamon and old paper. I liked to sit near her when I could close enough to hear the way she hummed softly while grading papers, or to catch the smile she gave when a student finally understood something difficult. It had been over a year since she handed me that poetry book in 4th grade. "You see things most kids don't," she said, tapping the cover gently. "That's the first sign of a writer, or a survivor." At the time, I didn't understand why those two were connected. By December, the classroom windows were fogged each morning, tracing ghost breath patterns on the glass. We kept our coats on until mid-morning, and the radiator hissed like it resented having to work. The whole school smelled like chalk dust, peanut butter sandwiches, and wet mittens. I didn't talk much at school, but I watched. I listened. I wrote. Miss Moore noticed. One afternoon, while the other girls chattered about holiday plays and Christmas dresses, I stayed behind to clean the chalkboards. "You're always the last one out, Dorothy," she said not unkindly. "I like the quiet," I answered, scrubbing in small circles. She nodded. "Me too." She walked to her desk, pulled out a folder, and held out a paper. "Your essay about winter. It read more like a poem. Would you mind if I put it on the bulletin board?" I blinked. "The big one." She smiled. "The very one." That night, I went home humming quietly, carrying a warmth in my chest that almost made me forget the chill outside. The next morning, I arrived early. The poem was already pinned up. The girl behind the wall. She listens through the silence, counting cracks in plaster lines. She sings without a voice, hoping someone hears her rhymes. No one said anything about it in class, but Miss Moore smiled at me once across the room. That was enough. At home, Mama didn't say much that week. She had a cough that rattled in her chest like an old drawer hard to close. William brought her tea with lemon and made her sleep most afternoons. He never asked how school was, never asked anything at all. I found the open house flyer folded in my desk. Miss Moore had written, "Hope to see you there. Dorothy, I saved you a corner spot in bright red ink." I handed it to William while he was reading the newspaper. "Can you give this to Mama?" I asked. He took it without looking. "Sure." She never mentioned it again. On the night of the open house, I waited on the school steps until dusk. Most of the other kids had already left with their parents, clutching handmade ornaments or showing off drawings. Miss Moore walked me to the door and said gently, "Maybe next time." I nodded. 2 days later, she handed out the results of a small poetry contest she'd entered our class in. There was a gold ribbon paperclip to mine. "First place," she said, "out of 3 schools." I traced the ribbon with my fingers. It shimmered under the classroom light, fragile and bright. At home, I placed it carefully on my dresser next to my Robin notebook. That night, when I returned from brushing my teeth, it was gone. I found it in the kitchen trash can stuck to the side of an orange peel. William stood behind me washing a mug. "Didn't think you'd miss that," he said. "Little girls don't need trophies for playing pretend." I didn't answer. I pulled the ribbon from the peel and rinsed it under the tap. The edges curled. In my room, I pried open a loose panel under the bed, one I had found the week before while sweeping. I placed the ribbon inside alongside the note I'd written last month. December 14th, 1961. First place, but not at home. The panel clicked back into place. Outside, the first heavy snow began to fall. I could hear it pressing gently against the windows, soft like secrets. I lay on my bed, holding my notebook against my chest, and whispered the last 2 lines of my poem under my breath. She sings without a voice, hoping someone hears her rhymes. It was supposed to be temporary, just until Mom got better. But he brought a pillow. That morning, the scent of Vicks was everywhere. It clung to Mama's pillowcases, to the towel by the sink, even to the air near the windows. I had helped her put on her socks, her ankles swollen, breath shallow, and William had stood nearby holding her coat, like a nurse who didn't know how to love. "She'll stay one night," the doctor had said over the phone. "Maybe two. Just observation. Flu's going around." William drove her to the hospital around noon. I stood on the porch steps in my heavy winter coat, watching the back of her head disappear behind the car door. She didn't wave. Or maybe she did, but the snow had started falling, then fine and dry like powder across a mirror. I stayed in the kitchen until the light began to fade. I wiped the same plate over and over. I boiled water for tea and never drank it. I watched the flame on the stove flicker small and blue and imagined what it would feel like to press my hand into it, just long enough to feel something sharp. William returned around 6. He placed a grocery bag on the counter and said, "Doctor says rest will do her good." Then, as if discussing the weather, "I'll sleep in your room tonight, just for safety." I stared at him. He didn't blink. "It's better this way," he added, "so I can hear the phone if the hospital calls." He carried a cot frame and a pillow down the hall into my room. The cot groaned as he unfolded it. He laid 2 folded blankets on top, then turned and looked around. "Cozy," he said. "Your mama kept it neat." I stood in the doorway, clutching the sleeves of my sweater. "I'll let you change," he said, brushing past me with the faint smell of aftershave and damp wool. "Don't be long." I waited until his footsteps faded into the kitchen, then quickly changed into my flannel nightgown. I slipped my Robin notebook into the pillowcase and slid the old floorboard loose again, just to make sure the folded notes were still there. They were. That night, the heater hummed steadily. The little space heater by the dresser clicked and ticked like a metronome losing time. The room smelled like Vicks and towels that hadn't dried all the way. William entered without knocking. He wore a robe over his long johns with socks that sagged at the ankles. He didn't go to the cot. He sat on my bed. My bed. He opened the evening paper and began to read. Legs crossed the rustle of the pages, making me flinch every time he turned one. I climbed into bed slowly, careful not to let the mattress creak. I turned to face the wall. My hands clenched under the covers. "You don't mind, do you?" he asked, eyes still on the newspaper. "Just until she's home." I didn't respond. He smiled. "That's a good girl." The light stayed on for a while. I closed my eyes anyway, trying to will myself somewhere else. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere far. At some point, he turned off the lamp. I thought he had gone to the cot, but I still heard him breathing too close. Then his voice, low and warm, curled through the dark. "Men need comfort too, you know." I didn't answer. Didn't move. My hands were sweating under the quilt, even though the room was cold. He stood. I felt the mattress shift as he got up. Then the soft metal click of his belt unbuckling. A pause. The swish of fabric, his robe maybe. Then finally the groan of the cot as he lay down on it. The silence that followed was louder than anything I'd ever heard. I lay stiff as stone, counting heartbeats. 15, 20, 30. I must have fallen asleep sometime near dawn, not into rest, but into something else, something flat and empty. In the dream, I screamed. Screamed like I meant it, like I had fire in my chest. But in the dream, my mouth didn't make a sound. No one turned. No one looked. When I woke, the cot was empty. The pillow still there, still warm. He had already made eggs. He placed a plate in front of me like everything was fine. Toast 1 slice. Egg overcooked. "You're quiet this morning," he said. I didn't speak. He leaned down, picked a crumb off the table, and flicked it away. "You don't need to be afraid of me, Dot. We're family now." I nodded, because what else could I do? He left the kitchen a moment later. I heard him in the bathroom humming a tune I didn't recognize. I slipped away from the table into the hallway into my room, pulled out my notebook. January 4th, 1962. He slept in my room. He said it was just for safety. He said men need comfort too. He sat on my bed. He smiled when I didn't speak. I folded the page 4 times and tucked it inside the secret pocket I'd sewn into the lining of my winter coat. That pocket used to hold stones, feathers, a green marble I once found under the porch. Now it held something else. That night, he returned again. The cot creaked once more. The lamp stayed on longer. I kept my eyes open longer. And when he whispered my name across the dark, I didn't answer. But I memorized every breath, every footstep, every pause. Because something in me had begun to shift. Not enough to speak, not yet, but enough to survive. He knocked just as William was brushing my hair. I had never been so thankful. It was Sunday morning, cold enough for the windows to wear lace, the kind of cold that made the house ache. I had just finished setting the table, 2 chipped plates, lukewarm biscuits, and a pot of stale coffee, and William had told me to sit still while he smoothed my hair down with Mama's old brush. "You don't want to look messy if someone drops by," he said. I flinched every time the bristles caught a knot, but I didn't say a word. That's when we heard it. 3 knocks. Not loud, not rushed, but firm. William's hand froze mid-stroke. He lowered the brush slowly and set it on the table. "Stay here," he said. He walked to the door with the stiffness of someone pretending to be calm. I craned my neck from the kitchen. Through the crack in the living room, I saw him open the door half an inch at first, just enough to peek through. Then wider. A gust of icy air followed the visitor in, along with the scent of wet wool and melting snow. "Morning." Mr. Holloway came a warm, familiar voice. I brought some bread and preserves for Evelyn, and I figured I'd check in. Pastor Allen. He stood tall, dressed in his dark gray overcoat, holding a brown paper bag in gloved hands. His beard was flecked with snow, and he smiled the way people do when they actually mean it. William's voice dropped a note too low. "She's resting. Flu, you know. Doctor says she shouldn't talk much." Pastor Allen nodded slowly. "Of course. Mind if I leave these in the kitchen?" William hesitated, then stepped aside. "Be my guest." The pastor's boots thudded softly against the rug as he entered, trailing tiny puddles behind him. When he saw me sitting at the table, his smile softened. "Well, good morning, Dorothy," he said. "You're up early." I nodded. "Morning, Pastor?" Before I could say more, William cleared his throat and stepped between us. "We were just finishing breakfast," he said. "Trying to keep things normal around here." Pastor Allen glanced at the cold biscuits and untouched coffee. "I see." He placed the bag on the counter and removed a small tin of apple butter and a loaf of bread wrapped in a dish towel. "Evelyn always liked these," he added, directing it toward me. "She'll appreciate it," I said, barely louder than a whisper. William poured himself more coffee and took a seat across from me as if to stake his claim. He didn't offer Pastor Allen a cup. The pastor remained standing, hands clasped behind his back. His eyes lingered for a moment on the brush beside my plate, then moved to the uneven way the table was set. He broke the silence gently. "Would either of you mind if I offered a short prayer?" Before I could answer, William said, "Actually, Pastor, now may not be the best time. Evelyn needs quiet." Pastor Allen nodded politely, but not before I saw his gaze flicker, brief but sharp. He turned to me again. "And how are you holding up, Dorothy? This can't be easy on you." I opened my mouth. William's hand tapped his cup twice, just once too loud to be casual. "She's been strong," he answered for me. "Very mature for her age. Real helper." The pastor gave me a look that asked a different question than his words. "I'm doing okay," I said finally. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small pin, gold-toned, shaped like a cross, no bigger than a thumb. "I keep a few of these," he said, placing it in my palm. "For strength. Keep it close." I closed my fingers around it. The metal was warm from his hand. "Thank you," I whispered. As he turned to leave, he paused near the door. The snow had stopped, and light spilled in from the gray sky outside. Then he looked at me one more time, not smiling this time. "Dorothy," he said quietly, "you can always talk to me about anything." I held his gaze for a breath too long, then nodded. He left. The door closed behind him with a soft thud. William didn't speak right away. He returned to the table, took another sip of coffee, and stared out the window. 10 minutes passed. Then, as I started to gather the plates, he said it. "Nice man. Too nice." I froze. "He seems to like you." I didn't answer. He leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming on the armrest. "Did you like him back?" I said nothing. His voice was even, but it curled at the edges. "You liked how he looked at you, didn't you?" I dropped a spoon into the sink too hard. It clanged. William stood slowly, walked past me. But before he left the room, he turned and added, "Next time he comes, you stay upstairs. No need for confusion." That night, I lay in bed, curled up tight, the pin still clutched in my hand under the pillow. The cot sat empty, but the space in the room felt smaller than ever. Outside, the snow began to fall again, and somewhere beneath my ribs, the tiniest flicker of something new stirred something like fear, with an edge of defiance. Or maybe it was the start of a voice. No cake, no candles. Just William saying, "You're almost a woman now." My 12th birthday began in silence. When I opened my eyes, the room was brighter than usual, late morning maybe, but it didn't feel like I had overslept. It felt like the day had crept past me on purpose, like it didn't want to be noticed either. My bed had been made. Not just tidied, tucked at the corners, pillow, fluffed the Robin notebook missing from beneath my case. The quilt was folded at the foot in a way I never did it. "William." I sat up slowly. My feet touched the cold floor with a soft thud. The heater was off. Outside, frost clung to the corners of the window like spiderwebs dipped in sugar. February 2nd, my birthday. 2 years ago, Mama had filled the kitchen with yellow balloons and baked a lemon cake that sank in the middle. She sang off-key, holding a spatula like a microphone. We danced to Patsy Cline while the pie burned in the oven. Today, the house smelled like old toast. I found William in the kitchen, already seated, sipping coffee. He didn't look up. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said. "You must have needed the rest." I pulled my robe tighter. I didn't mean to sleep in. He took another sip. "It's fine. I made your bed for you." I nodded. "Thanks." On the table sat a small, dusty bottle glass with a gold cap. I reached for it. He gestured. "That's for you. I thought you might want something more grown up." I turned it over in my hand. The label was half peeled. The perfume inside was amber-colored, thick at the bottom. "You'll want to smell nice," he added, smiling faintly. "You're not a little girl anymore." I didn't say thank you. I just placed the bottle in my pocket and stood still. "Get dressed," he said. "No school today. It's a family day." At first, I wanted to protest, but part of me already knew it wouldn't matter. In the hallway, I passed Mama's door. She was sitting up, hair flattened against one side of her face. Her eyes looked glassy, like she was still halfway between dreams. I stepped inside and hugged her. She blinked at me. "Is something wrong, dear?" "No," I said. "Just happy to see you up." She patted my arm. "You're such a sweet girl." Then she paused. "Is today Thursday?" "It's Friday," I said. "Oh." She didn't ask more. In the living room, the radio played softly. Patsy Cline again, warbling "I Fall to Pieces" like she knew how it felt. The house felt full and empty at the same time, like someone had moved all the furniture an inch to the left and never told me. William made lunch. Soggy eggs, overcooked sausage. We ate in silence. He asked if I wanted to play checkers. I said I had a headache. Later, I sat by the window with the cross pin Pastor Allen had given me last week. I pressed it into my palm until it left a mark. Around 5, William called me into the dining room. He had set the table. 2 plates, forks arranged neatly, a red cloth napkin under each glass. There was roast beef burned at the edges and boiled potatoes gray and soft. A bottle of wine stood open in the center. He held up a glass. "To your becoming," he said. I didn't lift mine. He clinked them anyway. "You're 12 now," he said. "That's a turning point. You'll start to feel things differently. See the world clearer." I nodded just once. I used to think birthdays were just about getting older. He continued cutting his meat. "But I've come to believe they're about becoming who you're meant to be." I watched the knife glide through the meat, watched the red center of the slice ooze onto the plate. He poured me wine. I took one sip. It tasted like metal and cherries. I coughed, and he chuckled. "You'll get used to it." After dinner, I excused myself quietly. In the bathroom, I leaned over the sink and stared at my reflection. My cheeks were pale. My eyes looked like someone else's. I opened my mouth to breathe, but choked instead. I fell to my knees, the tile cold against my skin, and threw up silently. There was no sound except the hiss of the radiator behind the wall and the soft patter of my tears as they struck the porcelain. When it was over, I flushed twice, wiped everything clean with a washcloth, and sprayed the air with lavender. Mama never came in. William never asked. That night, I lay in bed with the perfume bottle in one hand and the crosspin in the other. I didn't cry. I didn't write. I just stared at the ceiling and counted the seconds between breaths, waiting for the morning. I wrote the address twice, but my hand shook too much to drop it in the box. It was a Wednesday in March, and the rain tapped at the attic window like someone asking permission to come in. I sat on the floor beside an old shoebox, legs folded beneath me, fingers stiff with cold. The air smelled like dust and mothballs, like winter trying to hold on. The shoebox held odds and ends, old birthday cards, a broken pin, a tiny photo of Mama and Aunt Helen when they were teenagers, arms linked and smiling into the wind. I stared at it for a long time. Aunt Helen lived in Michigan. She had offered to take me once after Daddy passed. Mama said no, said I belonged here. But Helen sent cards sometimes. Signed them, "Love, always your other mother." She was the only one outside this house who still remembered my name with affection. Miss Moore's voice floated through my memory. "If you ever feel afraid, write it down. Words are stronger than silence." I pulled my Robin notebook from my coat pocket and opened to the last clean page. The pencil shook in my grip, but the words came anyway. March 10th, 1962. Dear Aunt Helen, I hope you're doing well. I'm writing because I don't know who else to tell. Everything's different here now. Mama sleeps a lot. She forgets things. She's tired all the time. I'm trying to help. I do the dishes and sweep and bring her tea. William says I'm doing a good job. He moved into my room for a while when Mama was sick. He said it was for safety. It's quiet now, even when he's around. I miss when the house smelled like pie. I miss Mama's humming. I miss being a kid. I don't know what I'm supposed to be now. Maybe I'm just tired. I don't want to get anyone in trouble. But I wish you could come get me. Or at least write back. Love, Dorothy. I reread the letter 3 times. Each time I changed, something softened the sentences, made them sound less urgent. I crossed out, "I feel strange around him," and replaced it with, "Maybe I'm just being sensitive." I took out the part about the cot. By the end, it was a whisper on paper. But it was still mine. I folded it slowly, like it might tear if I rushed. Slipped it into an envelope I'd saved from Mama's old bank statements. Wrote the address twice, careful block letters, trying not to smudge the ink. I waited until I heard the truck pull out of the driveway, William heading into town. Then I put on my coat, slipped the letter inside the inside pocket, and stepped out into the rain. The walk to the mailbox wasn't far. Just past the gate across the gravel drive. But it felt like crossing a border. Like stepping out of the hush and into a question. The rain soaked through my coat in minutes. I didn't bother with an umbrella. I stood there with the mailbox open, letter in hand. The box creaked on its hinges. Inside was dry waiting. I stared into it for what felt like hours. The letter trembled in my hand. I pictured Mama curled in bed, coughing softly, not knowing where I was. I pictured William coming back, asking where I'd gone. I pictured Helen opening the letter, her hands flying to her mouth. Calling. Driving. Showing up. I closed the mailbox. Didn't drop the letter. Walked back to the house with the envelope pressed flat against my chest, hidden between skin and wool. Inside, I peeled off my coat. Hung it on the hook. Water dripped onto the floor, small, polite drops. I changed into dry clothes. tucked the letter under the lining of my mattress between the springs and the wood. An hour later, William returned. He walked into the kitchen, brushing snow off his sleeves. Stopped short when he saw my damp hair. "Out walking?" he asked. I nodded. He glanced at my coat still dripping near the door. Then at the side table where the mail usually sat. "Rainy day for a letter," he said, voice light. I didn't answer. He tilted his head. "You writing secrets now?" I looked at him, kept my face blank, neutral. "No," I said. He smiled too quickly, then poured himself coffee. That night, I lay in bed with the damp envelope under my pillow. I didn't open it again, but I didn't throw it away. It was the first time the door made that sound click, and somehow that tiny sound felt louder than thunder. March had come in angry. The wind slapped against the windows like it had a score to settle. Branches scraped along the siding, and the old trees groaned like they were tired of standing. Inside the house was warm, but only in temperature. Everything else had turned cold. That evening, I stood at the bathroom sink brushing my teeth, while the mirror fogged slightly from the heater. I could hear William in the kitchen humming tunelessly as he washed the dinner plates. Mama had barely touched her soup and had gone to bed hours ago, a folded towel pressed against her temple. She was taking something new now. Blue pills. They made her sleep deep, the kind of sleep you couldn't wake from with a whisper. I rinsed my mouth, patted my face dry, and stepped into the hallway. The walls felt closer than usual. The air tasted faintly of mothballs and old cologne. When I reached my bedroom door, I paused. It was slightly ajar. William stood by my dresser, adjusting the curtain as if it were part of his evening routine. He turned when he heard me and smiled. "Ready for bed?" he asked. I nodded. He stepped aside, letting me pass. I moved quickly, grabbed my nightgown from the bedpost, and turned my back to change. I had learned to be fast, to move quietly, to never give him time to watch. When I was done, I climbed into bed and pulled the quilt up to my chin. William walked to the door, and then without saying a word, he reached behind him and turned the lock. Click. I sat up a little. "Why'd you lock it?" He turned slowly, his eyes calm. "We don't want anyone disturbing us, do we?" I felt my stomach knot. "Mama's asleep." He nodded. "Exactly." Then he walked across the room and sat on the edge of my bed. He didn't remove his shoes. He didn't adjust the blankets. He just leaned back slightly, staring up at the ceiling like he was waiting for something. I shifted toward the far edge of the mattress, trying not to breathe too loud. He said nothing. For a long time, there was only the hum of the heater and the distant growl of wind rattling the windows. I reached under my pillow and clutched the small cross Pastor Allen had given me. My fingers wrapped tightly around it, so tight the corners dug into my palm. William turned his head toward me slowly. "You're not a little girl anymore," he said. His voice was soft, almost kind, but the words settled on my chest like weight. "You know that, right?" I didn't respond. He reached toward me, one slow, deliberate motion. His hand hovered above my back, then touched the blanket. Just lightly. Fingertips, not a full hand. But enough. I flinched. He didn't pull away. Instead, he whispered, "You're becoming something else. Something important." I felt my throat close. He laid back hands folded over his chest, still fully dressed. Still staring at the ceiling. "I used to think I wanted a son," he said. "But maybe a daughter's better." "Daughters? Listen." I turned my face to the wall. My eyes blurred. I blinked them clear. He didn't touch me again. But the silence he left in that space between us rang louder than words. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. I couldn't tell anymore. The thunder rumbled softly outside, far off, but constant, like the sky couldn't decide whether to cry or scream. And in that cold, humming locked room, I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I mouthed the words anyway. "Please, God." Nothing. I lay still, gripping the cross so tightly, I thought it might leave a mark I'd carry forever. Behind me, I heard William shift once. The mattress groaned, but he didn't speak again. He just lay there, breathing, watching the ceiling, owning the room. I didn't sleep, not even a little. When morning came, the door remained locked. He laid it on my bed like it was a gift, but it felt like a warning. 3 days before Easter Sunday, the sky stayed the color of dishwater all morning. Outside the window, yellow tulips were blooming fresh full and too bright against the dull gray of the world. I watched them sway in the wind like they were whispering to each other, heads bowing and lifting in unison. The kind of movement that made you think of secrets. Inside the house was silent. No scent of cinnamon rolls, no clinking dishes from the kitchen, no Mama humming hymns while ironing our dresses for church. Mama hadn't left her bed since Friday. The doctor said it was exhaustion. William said it was just woman's frailty. He gave her pills the color of milk and sat by her bed for half an hour each night reading aloud from the newspaper in a tone too cheerful to be kind. That morning, I was folding towels in the hallway when I heard him call my name. "Dorothy, can you come here a sec?" His voice was high and pleasant, like sugar dropped into coffee that's already too sweet. I stepped into my room and stopped cold. Laid out on the bed, perfectly centered, was a yellow sundress. It had thin straps, a fitted waist, and tiny white buttons down the front. Cotton, by the look of it. Freshly pressed. The kind of dress made for Easter photos and spring picnics. The kind I never asked for. William stood beside it, one hand resting on the fabric like it belonged to him. "Picked this up last week," he said. "Thought of you soon as I saw it." I didn't move. He chuckled softly. "I know it's not your usual thing, but you'd look nice in it. You remember what I said you should wear brighter things." I remembered. In February, just before my birthday, he'd said the same thing. I had pretended not to hear him then. Now the dress was real, in my room, on my bed. I looked down at it. It was too delicate, too loud, too exposed. I hated it, but I didn't say that. "I wasn't planning on going to church this year," I mumbled. He gave a small laugh. "We don't have to go anywhere to dress up. Sometimes it's just for the people you love." I looked at the tulips outside, bright and unbothered. He continued, "We'll take pictures, just a few. You'll want to remember what it was like becoming." I flinched. He didn't notice, or pretended not to. He stepped toward me, gently brushing an invisible wrinkle from the bodice. "Try it on later. Make sure it fits." Then he left whistling as he walked down the hallway. The sound didn't echo. It stuck to the walls like a stain. I didn't touch the dress, but it stayed there all afternoon like a warning flare daring me to protest. That evening, William made dinner. Roast again. The edges were black. The carrots were soggy. He opened a bottle of red wine and set 3 glasses on the table. "For Easter," he said, "a little early." Mama appeared in her robe, moving slow, face pale. She sat at the table, but didn't eat. Her eyes blinked like the light was too much. William filled her glass halfway. Then mine. I didn't want it, but I took 1 sip. It tasted like metal and overripe cherries. "Too strong?" he asked, smiling. I nodded. He turned to me fully. "You're changing, you know. Your shoulders are straighter. Your face is longer. It's a good thing. It means you're growing." I didn't speak. He motioned for me to sit beside him. I stayed where I was. He raised an eyebrow. "Photos don't take themselves," he said. Mama stirred, looked up briefly. Her gaze hovered on me, then drifted back to her plate. I slid 1 seat closer to him. He smiled. "There we are." Throughout dinner, he kept glancing at me, raising his glass, as if to toast something invisible between us. "To becoming," he said at one point. I swallowed hard. Later in the quiet of the bathroom, I took the dress from my bed and held it in front of the mirror. It was soft, well made, pretty even. On someone else, it would have been beautiful. I slipped it over my head. It fit perfectly, and I hated that it did. I stared at the girl in the mirror. She didn't look like me. Her eyes were too empty, her shoulders too tense, her mouth tight, unreadable. I whispered, "Who are you?" Then slowly, I reached for the seam beneath my left arm. Tugged. The first rip was small, then another, then it split. I pulled harder until the stitching popped. When I was done, the dress hung off me like broken paper. I folded it neatly and laid it back on the bed, the tear hidden underneath. I stared at the mirror one more time. "You're still here?" I said softly. That night, the house felt unusually still. The wind had died down. The tulips outside stood motionless, glowing under the porch light like sentinels. Mama's door was cracked open. I passed by quietly. As I reached for my doorknob, I heard it. "Dorothy," just a whisper. Just once. Her voice. I turned, but her eyes were already closed again. Still, I had heard her. For the first time in what felt like months, Mama had called for me. I curled into bed, clutching the crosspin under my pillow, the silence around me somehow less heavy. And the torn yellow dress stayed exactly where I left it. Unworn, unwanted, unforgotten. Her voice was faint, but her eyes, they were sharp, and they saw me. Mid-April brought rain so steady it felt like it had no intention of stopping. It pattered against the windows all morning, soaking the tulips, washing away the chalk lines William had drawn on the porch steps. For some reason he never explained. The house smelled like damp wool and lemon tea. The fireplace in the den flickered with small, polite flames. William had lit it that morning and left it crackling quietly, though he stayed in the kitchen polishing silverware that didn't need polishing. Mama hadn't asked for anything in weeks, but that afternoon she called for me. "Dorothy," she said, her voice raspy but clear. "Would you mind bringing me some tea?" I froze in the hallway. Something about her voice felt different. Not stronger, just present. I made the tea, slowly lemon with a splash of honey, the way she used to like it. I placed the cup on the chipped saucer with the faded roses and carried it down the hall, every step louder in my ears than it should have been. She was sitting up in bed, legs wrapped in a heavy knit blanket, hands folded in her lap. Her hair was brushed thin and graying at the temples. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said as I placed the cup on her nightstand. I sat down on the edge of the bed, unsure whether to stay or leave. I kept my eyes on the tea, watching the steam curl upward like smoke from a secret fire. Mama didn't say anything for a long time. The only sounds were the crackling fire from the next room and the soft tick of the wall clock. Then, barely more than a whisper, she said it. "You don't smile anymore." My breath caught. I looked up, startled. Her eyes were on me, wide and unblinking. Not clouded, not distant. Focused. "I'm fine," I said quickly, too quickly. She tilted her head slightly. "Are you?" I nodded. "Just tired." Her hand reached for mine. Frail, bony fingers touched mine lightly, like she wasn't sure she had the right to. "You used to hum while you set the table," she said. "Used to dance when no one was watching." I looked down. "I still do. Sometimes," I lied. She didn't correct me. She didn't need to. Instead, she said, "Tell me what I've missed." I shook my head. "Nothing." She squeezed my hand. The pressure was weak, but it was something. A tether. My lip trembled before I could stop it. I tried to blink fast, too fast, but it didn't matter. The tears came anyway. Silent. Hot. One drop, then another, until they blurred my vision entirely. Mama reached forward slowly and cupped my face in both hands. I hadn't been held like that in years. She pulled me gently forward until my forehead rested against her collarbone. "I see it now," she whispered. I sobbed then, but still without sound. My whole body shook, and I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know if I wanted to. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't look. I should have looked." I clung to her like a child I no longer believed I was allowed to be. She didn't ask questions. She didn't say his name. She just held me, rocked me gently. Let the apology land in the only way it could. We sat like that for what felt like an hour. By the time the fire had softened to embers, the rain had slowed outside. On the radio, a gospel hymn played low, something old, something soft. "I'll fly away." That's when we heard the door creak. William. He stepped into the den and stopped short. We turned, still holding hands. I met his eyes. He looked between us, then tilted his head slightly. "Everything all right in here?" he asked. His voice was syrupy, measured. Mama didn't answer. I did.
Yes.
William nodded slowly. Then without another word, he turned and walked out. The moment the door closed behind him, Mama gripped my hand tighter. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to, because in that silence, I felt it. She knew. Not everything.
Not yet.
But enough. And for the first time in months, I wasn't alone in the knowing. For once, the sound of a lock wasn't frightening, it was mine. It was a stormy evening in late April, the kind where the trees outside bend just enough to look like they're bowing to something invisible. Rain came in hard slashes against the windows, and the wind screamed through the gutters like it had something to prove. The power had flickered once at dinner. Just once. But it was enough to remind all of us how easily light could disappear. The house smelled like damp earth and lemon soap. The fireplace in the den crackled faintly, but the warmth didn't quite reach the hallway, where shadows stretched long across the faded carpet. Mama was in bed again, half asleep, half listening, her eyes open just enough to let the world in. William had been short all day, his steps louder, his requests sharper. After dinner, he paced the kitchen like he was waiting for something to happen. I was rinsing the last dish when he spoke.
Dorothy, he called, his voice echoing across the house. Bring me a glass of water.
I didn't answer.
Not right away.
He called again, a little louder. Now. I dried my hands on the towel by the sink, walked slowly to the cabinet, pulled out a glass, filled it carefully, no splashing, no shaking, and walked down the hallway. The glass was cool in my hand. I could feel every tremble in my fingertips as I approached the bedrooms. His door was open, just a sliver.
Mine stood waiting.
I stopped, stared. The hallway was so quiet, I could hear the second hand ticking in the den. Then I turned. I walked into my own room, set the glass on the nightstand, and gently, deliberately closed the door.
Then I locked it.
Click. It was a soft sound, almost gentle. But in that silence, it rang like a thunderclap. I stood still for a moment, back against the door heart, pounding so loud it echoed in my ears. Then I stepped back, hand still on the knob, and waited.
10 seconds. 20.
Then, footsteps. Heavy, measured. Then came his voice. Dorothy.
Flat. No question.
He tried the knob, rattled it.
Twice.
Open the door. Still, I said nothing. He hit it with the side of his hand. Open this door now. His tone cracked just a little, the performance slipping. I didn't move. Then, a softer voice, from down the hallway. William. It was Mama. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. A beat of silence passed. He turned. I heard it in his steps. Slower now, hesitant. I pressed my ear to the door. The hallway quieted. Then her voice again. Come in here. The click of her lamp, the shift of covers, the creak of her bed frame as she sat up. William's door didn't creak open this time. Mama's did. I heard it swing slowly, then close. What followed wasn't yelling. It wasn't even conversation at first. Just the weight of silence and tension curling around each word, like a storm held back behind glass. I leaned closer, straining to hear. She's locking doors now, William muttered. She thinks she runs this place. Mama's voice was soft, firm.
I told you to sit.
A pause.
Then a chair scraped lightly across the floor. She's playing you, William said. You don't see it.
I see her, Mama replied. And I see you. William didn't speak. Mama inhaled sharply. Then, if you ever touch her again, I'll find a way to speak. Those words didn't ring, they landed. Heavy, deadly, intentional. There was no yelling. No arguing, just a silence so deep I felt it in my bones. Then William's voice again, flat but quieter now. You don't know what you're talking about. I do, Mama said. Now. Another pause. Then the door creaked open. Footsteps moved down the hallway. Slower this time. Measured. He passed by my door but didn't stop. Didn't knock. Didn't even test the knob. I heard the couch springs creak as he settled down in the living room. I stood frozen in my room, fingers still around the cold metal of the doorknob. Then I stepped back, walked to my bed and sat. For the first time in months, the room felt mine.
The blanket Mama had knitted years ago, soft blues and creams, still sat folded at the foot. I wrapped it around myself, curled under it, and pulled my knees to my chest. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Not crying, not shaking, just breathing. When sleep finally came, it came gently, like a hand resting on my shoulder. Sometime near dawn, I heard the front door. It opened softly, then the sound of keys, then silence. I peeked out the window, heart thudding. His truck was pulling away down the gravel drive. No goodbye, no sound, just the red lights shrinking into the mist. By the time the wind settled and the tulips rose again, William was gone, and the lock still held. He was gone, but the silence he left behind was louder than anything else. It was a different kind of silence, not the heavy, suffocating hush that used to hang between his footsteps. Not the stillness of held breath behind a locked door. This silence was softer, unfamiliar, the kind that waits rather than watches, the kind that feels like breath returning to lungs you forgot you had. That morning, the rain had stopped sometime before dawn. The world was wet but calm. Gray light spilled through the windows like it didn't want to startle anyone. I woke not to voices or banging or fear, but to the sound of birds. Real birds. I didn't know how long it had been since I heard them. Their chirps were tentative, like even they weren't sure it was safe yet. When I stepped out of bed, the floor didn't creak like it usually did. Or maybe it did, but my body didn't brace for it. I moved across the room without mapping out a plan. That was new. In the kitchen, Mama was already sitting at the table. Her hair was pulled back loose at the nape, her robe tied snug around her waist. There were 2 bowls on the table. Oatmeal, still warm. She didn't look at me with urgency, or worry, or confusion. She just nodded toward the chair beside her and said, "Eat what you can. You don't have to finish." I sat. She didn't speak for a while, just sipped her tea. When she finally did, her voice was low, like it hadn't been used in a long time. "You don't have to talk," she said. "I'll listen when you're ready." That sentence, so simple, made my throat tighten. We sat like that quietly side by side. No William, no edge to the silence, just space. After breakfast, she stood slowly, stretched her arms like someone remembering they had a body, and walked to the back door. "I'm going to check the garden," she said. I didn't follow, but I watched her through the screen. She knelt by the flower bed, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hands digging into the damp soil. Tulip bulbs lined the edge, soggy from the rain, but upright. She cleared out dead leaves, turned the dirt gently as if coaxing it back to life. She worked like someone sewing a wound closed, one scoop at a time. Inside, I wandered through the house, room by room. No checking shadows, no listening for him, just walking. I found myself in the den. The fireplace was clean, but empty. The air smelled like lemon wood polish and faint smoke. I ran my fingers along the edge of the old piano. It hadn't been played since before Christmas. I lifted the lid slowly, quietly, pressed one key, then another. They were out of tune but soft. I didn't play more. Just sat on the bench with the lid open, hands in my lap, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost. Around midday, there was a knock at the front door. Mama and I exchanged a look. She stayed where she was. I walked to the door, cracked it open. Pastor Allen stood there holding a cloth-wrapped bundle. He didn't say much, just fresh bread. I nodded. "Thank you." He handed it over. Inside the cloth was a folded note. I didn't open it right away. He tipped his hat, eyes kind but searching, then said, "We're still here if you want to visit," and left. I placed the bread on the counter, opened the note. "Healing takes time. So does forgiveness. Start with breath, then with each other." We ate slices of the bread that evening with honey and butter. It was warm and soft, and smelled like a kitchen I didn't realize I'd missed. The radio played quietly in the corner, no sermons, no gospel. Just music, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I spoke a full sentence. "I want to go back to school next fall." The words sat on the table for a second, like they were afraid to be real. Mama looked up. Tears touched the corners of her eyes, but she didn't cry. She reached for my hand instead, held it, Squeezed. I think that's a wonderful idea, she said. We didn't toast. We didn't make plans. We just sat together, holding hands, listening to the soft hum of the radio and the distant call of birds outside the window. Later that night, as I curled into bed with the blanket she'd knit me when I was 9, Mama came to my door. She didn't knock. Just leaned in softly and said, "Let's plant something new tomorrow." I nodded, and for the first time, I whispered back, "Okay." It wasn't just sunlight, it was peace touching my skin for the first time in years. The morning came soft, not like an alarm, not like a knock, but like a gentle hand brushing my cheek. Mid-June in Ohio meant warm air and sleepy birds, and that day they sang in pairs. One on the oak near my window, one on the roof. I listened to their calls and responses, each note like a question the other answered without fear. I opened my eyes slowly. The curtains were swaying barely, and the sun poured through in long, golden ribbons. It caught the faded wallpaper and made it glow just like it had on my 8th birthday before everything turned quiet. Back then, I believed golden mornings were promises. Today, I believed again. I slipped out of bed barefoot, feeling the wood floor warm under my toes. No need to rush. No reason to brace. I walked through the house like it belonged to me, and it did. Mama was already outside. I saw her through the kitchen window in a wide brim hat, humming something soft while pruning the roses near the fence. Her gloves were dirt-stained, but her posture was light. Not strong exactly, but steady. Like someone who had decided to keep choosing. I made a sweet tea light on sugar heavy on lemon, poured it into glasses, and stepped onto the porch. She turned when she heard the door and smiled. I handed her a glass. She took a sip, made a face. "Too much lemon." I laughed. "You always say that." We sat side by side in the shade of the porch, listening to the rocking chair creak beneath us, and the bees hover lazily over the blooms. No one spoke for a while. We didn't need to. At one point, Mama said, "You sleep okay?" I nodded. She looked at me carefully, not like she was checking, but like she was memorizing. "Then you don't flinch in your sleep anymore." That made my eyes sting. But I didn't cry. I just said I know. Later that afternoon, we walked into town together. It was market day, but we weren't shopping. Mama wanted to return a book, and I hadn't been to the library in almost a year. The building still smelled like it always had dust and lavender polish. Cool and quiet. Ms. Rose stood behind the desk, rearranging a display of summer reads. She looked up and gasped, not theatrically, genuinely surprised. "Dorothy Holloway," she said softly. "Back from hibernation." I smiled. Mama returned her book and we made small talk, gardens, weatherbirds. Just enough. Then Ms. Rose reached beneath the counter and pulled out a slim cloth-bound journal. The cover was soft blue. Blank pages, stitched spine. No title. She handed it to me without a word. When I hesitated, she added, "Write it all down. Not because you owe anyone, but because you're a survivor. Not a secret." I took it. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid to hold my own story. We walked home slow. The sun was warm, but the breeze was kind. Later in the quiet of my room, I sat at the desk, opened the journal, held the pen a long time, then wrote, "I forgive you, but I never forget." The sentence sat in the center of the first page, sharp and steady. It wasn't for him. It wasn't even for Mama. It was for me. I closed the journal and slid it into my drawer, then stood at the window watching the light dance across the tulips we had planted together. Some petals were torn. Some bloomed sideways. But they were alive. And so was I. As I turned away, I whispered quiet but clear, "One day I'll tell my story out loud." And this time I knew I would.